Hi everyone, it's great to be here at PyCon APAC 2020 talking about two topics that I'm really passionate about, which are Python and documentation. In this webinar, we'll talk about what's docs as code and when it makes sense to use this approach. Then we'll have a more practical part where I will share with you some techniques and tools I use to document software projects. My name is David Garcia, I'm from Spain, as you might have noticed from my accent, and I will be facilitating today's session. I'm currently working as an independent consultant at API documentation.xyz, enhancing the developer experience of my clients' APIs by combining SDKs, tooling, and documentation. Before becoming an independent consultant, I worked as a software engineer in a consultancy firm. While integrating third-party services, some of them had poor or even non-existent documentation, so I quickly learned to value good docs. Indeed, most people in this virtual room could agree that documentation is useful because it saves others time to get onboarded into our product, for example, or into our code. Even it can help yourself if you don't see the code you have written after a long period of time. But also, it can make a decision maker to choose our product when they are comparing between different alternatives. But on the other hand, when it comes to writing documentation, we are hesitant to work on docs as developers. Why is that? Well, one reason why writing documentation is not as exciting as coding for us is because docs gets quickly updated as soon as a new version of the software is released. For example, if we want to track if our code is current, we can always run unit and integration tests to see if they pass and apply fixes accordingly. On the contrary, we are not used to test our documentation in that way, having to review what has changed page by page every time there is a new release. The second reason is that docs are usually written when someone requires them. This means that docs are not usually treated as regular requirements included in the sprints, but as an afterthought. This breaks completely our journey, shifting our focus, the tools we normally use, and messing with our initial planning estimations. So how can we make contributing to docs more enjoyable? Well, an option is to treat docs as if they were code. This approach proposes to include the documentation in the definition of done, in a way that's pleasant for developers and technical writers to write by using the same tools and processes developers use for coding. Well, and which are the benefits of following this approach? First, technical writers and developers can collaborate better between each other. This workflow also works well when we want to open source our documentation and let external contributors report issues and improve it as they read it. Secondly, we can plan docs as part of the sprints before someone requests them, having less outdated docs. Thirdly, thanks that docs are in plain text format, we can produce outputs in different formats such as HTML or PDF from the same exact source. We also achieve better consistency among the different documents by applying testing to our docs. And finally, by having automated CI pipelines, we can reduce the time between the doc releases. Okay, so now let's see how docs as code can be applied into a practical project from scratch. Imagine that we are working on a project and we have been tasked to develop a software development kit to order pizza delivered at home through an API. That's why this pizza icon here. So in this session, we are going to put us in a situation where we are going to apply a docs as code workflow to document this hypothetical pizza SDK that has been requested to us. So to do so, I'm going to enter into this repository You can try yourself and follow the tutorial at the same time I do it, but also you will have this video available later uploaded, so you can just follow the session and use the video and the code produced that will be available as well in this repository that's shown here on the screen. Okay, so we have opened the page, and before cloning this template into our local computer, we need to make sure that we have installed the following dependencies. So if you don't have in your computer Git or Python 3 or PIP, please follow these links and you will have a tutorial that will show you how to install them. But what we are going to do, assuming that you have this already installed, is to go to this button and make a copy of the repository in your GitHub account. So click fork, this will create a copy, and then once the fork is created, just click this button code. You can copy this URL, open a new terminal window or a console prompt, and type the command git clone and paste the link you have created. Once you press enter, this will download all the template in your computer. I have already done that, so I'm not going to press enter, but you can open then this code that you have downloaded with any IDE you use for developing normally, or with any text editor. In my case, as you can see, I'm using a Visual Studio Code, and what we are going to do is to start writing our documentation for this project. So what's in this project that we have downloaded? Okay, we have here some images that we will be using later. We have also some generic files, the slides that we have been using. But what's more relevant here is that we have a file that represents an hypothetical implementation of the pizza SDK that we have to document, for example. So the first question that we must ask to ourselves before starting writing some docs is where these docs should live. And we have two options, in fact. One option would be to place the docs near the source code, that means in this repository, or another option would be to create a separate repository to host these docs. I normally advise, when possible, to keep the docs and the code the closest as possible, because it makes it more natural to update the docs as the development advances, instead of having to shift between different repositories. So what we can do, for example, is to create a docs folder within the root directory to keep the docs organized and near the code. So here I'm just going to type docs and create a new folder. All right, so now that we have a docs folder, we can start creating our first document. And this document will be around how to get started and install, for example, this package in a project, for example. So we will write it in plain text so that we can export it later into multiple formats, such as HTML or PDF. And you can use any markup language to add some format, because if we just write plain text and we pass this to a program, it won't be able to, for example, format bold text or format links. We need to use some special annotation that these programs can read in order to produce, for example, links or to produce headings. So between all of them, I have picked RestructuredText for this tutorial because it integrates really well with Python in general. So what I'm going to do is to create just a new file inside the docs folder that's going to be called installation.rst. Okay, so here we have our file, an empty file, And what I'm going to do is to copy some text that I have prepared to speed up the session. So you will see it's all in plain text. There is nothing special here. And I have an extension that we can use to preview how the restructured text will look like once we add some annotations. If you don't have this program installed, to preview it, you can use this editor. It's called RST Online Editor. And I'm going to copy the text and send it to you so that you can also practice with it. So I'm going to copy it in the chat. Okay. Now I'm going to move again to my regular editor, Visual Studio Code, and we are going to add some format to this text. Here are like the most regular kind of styles that you will be using. This might cover, for example, the 90% of the cases. So what we are going to do first is to choose a heading adornment for the first level of titles. You can use any of them, but if you choose one for each one, for example, you need to stick to it in all the documents to achieve some consistency. So I'm going to use this equal sign here. Okay, and if I save this file, you see here that this title has been formatted differently. So I'm going to follow the same approach, adding some dashes under requirements and under installation to create subtitles. Okay, the dashes should more or less fit the length of the sentence you are underlining. And also what we can do here is to add some format to these lines, formatting it, for example, as an ordered list. To do so, we can use the path symbol. Okay, and it will render like this, as you will see. Auto numbering like the different sentences automatically. We can also just use an ordered list for this case. And what we can do more, for example, what we can do is to format this as a link. Right now it's separate. So what we can do is to use this ref accent to open and close the link. Open the symbols around. Okay, we are missing this. And adding an underscore at the end, we have our link formatted. Also, we can add, for example, some bold text, wrap the pizza SDK word between asterisks, or if we just wrap it between one asterisk, the bold should appear as in italics. And for example, we can add some format to this special code, and to do so, we can use the directive code. This should format it as code if we indent it properly. Okay, we see the difference. And for example, we can also load images with the directive figure. So I'm going to write figure here. And as you can see here, we are displaying an image. This image is getting me a little bit hungry. But okay, so far we have achieved to format our page. Okay, so after writing our first document, let's see how can we keep multiple versions of our documentation changes using Git. To collaborate with others and plan our documentation efforts, we can also use a platform like GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket. So here in the next slide, in fact, we are going to use GitHub, the GitHub flow. We are going to open this link that will open an interactive presentation and follow the process step by step. This process is the same one as all the developers we usually follow to ship software. So the first step defined by Git is to create a branch to submit our changes. This allows us to work on the changes without having conflicts with the production main branch. And to do so, I'm typing in the command line the command git checkout -b and the name of the branch. For example, since we are adding some installation notes, I'm just going to write installation notes. And we have switched to a new branch. Then we are going to upload our changes to the remote repository. To do so, let's drag these files we have added with the command git add, and since it's under the docs folder, we can add as well docs folder. Okay, so then we need to tag our changes locally with the command git commit -m, and we can add a message. For example, add installation notes and press enter. Once we want to update the changes to GitHub, to the remote repository, we can type the command git push. In fact, we need to put this whole command to specify the branch where we want to submit our changes. And the code should be uploaded into this new branch. So we can repeat this process as many times as we need until we are happy with the resulting doc. We can add more changes, add more commits, and this will appear here on the remote repository. So you have received a notification here saying that the branch has been updated. And let's continue with the GitHub flow. So we have followed this next step, that is add commits. And now we need to open a pull request. So to open a pull request, we can click here on this notification that has appeared. And this will initiate a discussion around our changes and typically solve an issue that we have assigned to ourselves during the sprint planning. So if I open the issues tab, you can see here that there's an issue assigned to myself, the label documentation to create the installation instructions. So what we can do in this pull request is to say that this closes the issue number 1. We could add, for example, some of you as reviewers if you were assigned to this repo. Also add some labels here, for example, documentation, and just create the pull request. Okay. If we want to go a little bit more advanced, what we could do is to go here to settings, go to branches, add a rule, and for example, limit the number of reviewers required in order to get the pull request matched. For example, if one reviewer doesn't approve the pull request, this cannot be merged. So this is really great to achieve a good quality of our documentation and to ensure that it's reviewed, for example, before submitting changes to production. Following the GitHub flow, the next step is to discuss and review the code. For example, one technical writer or another documentarian could go here and say, for example, that we have missed one requirement. And they can start, for example, a review or add it as a single comment. Then the other person could add some commits, overriding or addressing these comments. And once everybody is happy with the result, what can be done is to merge this pull request into the main branch, into the master branch. Okay, so I have clicked merge, and now we can see that the master branch already has these changes. Okay, so we have completed the peer review process and we have deployed our documentation into the master branch. Now I'm going to move, for example, to the master branch to continue from there. Okay, I'm going to pull the changes, I downloaded all that we have done in this master branch, and we are going to continue by testing our documentation. When we test our docs, we might want to check for different aspects, such as having a consistent style, voice, and tone across our documentation. Before starting this step, it's important to sit down with other developers and members of your organization and decide how do you want your docs to sound like. This can be done by defining a style guide together. For example, if I open the GitLab style guide, they have defined here in plain English, not with any special code language, in plain English, how do they want the documentation to sound like. For example, they want to avoid duplication, they want to capitalize titles in a way, they want to use an inclusive language. They have list here all the rules that they want to follow, and in case someone writes a new doc, this guide should be taken into account in order to format the docs in this exact way. So once this is defined in plain English, once you have the rules you want to apply to your docs, you can turn them into code and enforce the style guide with the Vale extension. If you want to install Vale, you can follow this link, and here you have the instructions to install the tool locally for your operative system. When working with Vale, we must configure some files. The first file that we need to configure is the configuration file that's called vale.ini. And this file, as you can see, defines where the styles that we want to apply, the rules that we want to apply will be located. In this case, will be inside the GitHub styles folder. Also, the minimum alert level that will raise. There are 3 levels, one that is suggestion, another one that is warning, and the final one that is error. Also, which kind of files should we apply those rules? For example, we only want to apply to markdown files or restructured text files, for example, and the styles that we will be loading. We are going to load the Vale style that provides basic spell checking, and also we are going to define our custom set of styles. For example, we are call them pizza, and we will be defining some rules. For example, we have defined here a rule that checks if there are pineapple pizza occurrences in our documentation, and show a warning, because there are some people that doesn't like this kind of pizza. It's not my case, but we want to raise a warning in someone who writes these 2 emojis together or Hawaiian pizza in our docs. Also, there are like other styles that you can adapt from other existing documentation, and also here in the Vale official documentation, you have some examples that you can review and copy and see how can you adapt to follow your rules. So, for example, we can, for example, copy this one. That will raise an error if in an enumeration there are more than 3 items together, because it would appear as a sentence that it's too long. So I have copied. I'm going to add here a new file, and I will just write, for example, enumeration.yaml. Okay, so I'm going to paste it here. I'm going to press save, and we are actually going to test some of these rules, for example, in the documentation file that we have created. For example, if we move to the installation file, here we can change this sentence and write here Hawaiian pizza SDK instead of pizza SDK, and we are going to run Vale. So I'm just going to write the command Vale docs, And here it's displayed that there are pineapple pizza occurrences in our documentation. So we have the suggestion, like the recommendation, to fix our text or change it. We can also run Vale every time we push some new commit into our repository automatically. Here you have a file that's already configured and just tracks the file that has changed every time we make a new commit. So here in the repo I have done already an example. It's closed the pull request, but it's already here. Okay, it's this one should throw an error because we have submitted some as well Hawaiian pizza here. And as you can see, Vale is complaining about it. So it's really good to see if our documentation is following the style or not. And also we can prevent from the settings branches option to enforce these rules. For example, if we want to block the pull request if there are some errors raised by Vale. Okay, after testing our docs, the final step of this webinar is to publish our documentation in a dedicated website. We have just worked right now with plain text, but we want to produce some HTML, some PDF from this raw text, and to do so we are going to use Sphinx. Sphinx is a tool that allows us to turn the restructured text into HTML and PDF, and it also brings other powerful features like cross-references between pages and power-ups in the forms of extensions and themes. Here we have a cheat sheet to install Sphinx in our project. So I'm just going to do pip install Sphinx to install the requirement. Okay, so now that we have Sphinx installed, what we can do is to type the command Sphinx quick start docs to create a new documentation project inside the docs folder. It will start asking us questions to configure it in a way or in another. For example, we are not going to separate the source and build directories for this demo. We are going to put as the project name Pizza SDK. The author name for this could be PyCon APAC 2020. And the project release, for the project release you can use any version number that you prefer. And of course, in this case, the project language is in English. So now that I have pressed enter, we have seen that here we have created some new files. Let's take a look. We have seen that there is a configuration folder, a configuration file. This file defines some rules and some extensions that we want to load in our documentation system. And also we have some make files in order to build our documentation. So what we can do now is to just run the command make HTML to produce an HTML output of our docs. In Windows, it's instead of make HTML, it's make.bat and then HTML inside the docs folder. Okay, so as we can see, we have our documentation built with one warning that says that basically, if we scroll up, that document is not included in the doc tree. So if we go to this index file that has been created, it wasn't there before, here we have like the table of contents and it's empty. And it's complaining that this file is not in the table of contents, so we just need to add it here. Save it, press make bat HTML again, and now we don't have any warnings. So if we go inside the build folder HTML and open the index.html file with any browser, we see a beautiful documentation page that has, in fact, the documentation we have written before. And we can host this HTML wherever we want. For example, in GitHub pages. As I said before, also, the Sphinx community creates a lot of extensions to power up Sphinx, and also themes that you can reuse or even adapt. Here in this page, sphinxthemes.com, you can find a lot of beautiful and appealing documentation themes with the instructions to install them. This is the most popular one because ReadTheDocs put it by default in its documentation. This is the more recognizable one. And also in this same page, you have extensions to power up Sphinx. We need to go to resources and click here on extensions. Finally, instead of hosting the documentation in GitHub pages, we're going to use the service ReadTheDocs. I have picked ReadTheDocs because it integrates really well with GitHub and with Sphinx at the same time, but you can deploy them directly to GitHub pages or any other hosting. I'm going to add first an option that's missing on the configuration file. Here in the configuration file, I'm going to add the option master doc equals index. This just means that our main page or main documentation page is the index one, and without it, ReadTheDocs complains. And what I'm going to do now is to submit my changes to GitHub, git commit -m, update configuration. I'm going to add all first. And then git push as we have done before. Okay, so now the changes should be already uploaded to the repository, and we are going to open the page readthedocs.org. I have already an account, but if you don't have one, just go into the page, click register, and create a new account with GitHub, and you should be able to see all your repositories in there. I'm going to click here. I'm going to import a new project, and the project is named Docs as Code Workshop, so I'm just going to click here on the plus button in order to add it, and that's it. We don't need any other special option to build our docs. Just going to write on next. We want to build the latest documentation, that one that it's in master, so I'm going just to click on build version, and every time that it's a new commit, this job will run automatically, so you won't have to click this button again, and every time you push something, you will have your documentation always up to date. So here we see the documentation being compiled, and when it ends, we will be able to see it in the page. In the meanwhile, what we can do is to see these other tab versions, and we can create multiple documentation versions if we have, for example, different branches, for example, or releases. We have, for example, the release 1.0 and 2.0. We can have different documentation pages, just adding new versions to ReadTheDocs. Okay, so this has built successfully, as we can see here. I'm going to open this button, and here we have our documentation page uploaded and ready to share. So anyone can view this page. It's online, and I will put it here in the repository as well, so you can access it later. Okay, so let's move back to the slides. And here is a list of all the tools that we have been using for the different stages when we have been preparing the documentation. And one final thought that I would like to share with you is that the docs as code approach does not magically make developers to write docs. In fact, developers still need to be trained on how to write, and on the other hand, also the technical writers and anyone contributing to documentation should be trained on how to use Git and these tools that we have presented today. Also, the docs as code approach does not work per se if the company culture does not want to embrace adding the documentation related efforts in their definition of done. So this is an effort that should be done collectively in order to make it happen. And the last thing that I want to share with you is that if you want to learn more about docs as code, I send in a monthly newsletter all the interesting articles and videos I read about technical writing and API design. You can subscribe and read the first submission, leaving your email at apidocumentation.substack.com. And that's all. Thank you very much for attending my session, and see you in the other task programming during these 2 weeks. Also, do not hesitate to ask me any questions here or after the talk through my Twitter account, Garcia360. Thank you very much.